US-Israel war on Iran entered its 34th day with renewed military activity across the Gulf, mounting threats to critical infrastructure and intensifying diplomatic efforts as disruptions to the Strait of Hormuz continued to weigh on global markets. US President Donald Trump said Washington's core strategic objectives in the war were nearing completion, while warning that strikes would intensify over the next 2 to 3 weeks, signaling both escalation and a potential pathway to exit. Meanwhile, India, along with 60 more countries, have joined efforts to ensure the safe reopening and navigation of the Strait of Hormuz, as it remains at the center of both military and economic tensions, with disruption to shipping routes deepening by the day. And tonight on the broadcast, we're joined by Mr. Christof Ruhl, Global Advisor, Crystal Energy, Senior Scholar, Center on Global Energy Policy, Columbia University. Thank you very much for giving us your time. We are looking at a prolonged war. My question is very simple. To begin with, how do you think this will reshape the global oil supply expectations?
Well, to some extent, if economists, have a problem to face and are at their most unhelpful, they either say it depends or they say it's too early to tell. In this case, it's a bit too early to tell. Everything will depend on whether there's further damage to oil production facilities and transport facilities. Because right now, we are still in a world, if peace would break out tomorrow and access through the Strait of Hormuz would open up tomorrow, there would be enough oil for prices to drop quite fast. And even LNG and other materials would recover because the damage is, in the case of LNG, small, and in the case of other things, not lasting. If, however, the war broadens and there should be more, either a longer disruption or volumes be affected physically by damage to production facilities, that picture could dramatically worsen.
As we speak, several countries
has markets on edge.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you, but as we speak, there are a lot of countries that are coming together, including India, to have a discussion and dialogue on opening the Strait of Hormuz. This at a time when Donald Trump has said that after they exit, after the conflict is over, the Strait of Hormuz is going to open on its own. Is he underestimating the long-term risks involved?
I think, to me, somebody who is observing energy markets for a very long time, it is simply unbelievable. It's completely mind-boggling how a US president and an Israeli prime minister could authorize these strikes on Iran without thinking about a plan B for the Strait of Hormuz. Because everybody, but literally everybody, every oil analyst, gas analyst, energy person, economist in the world would have always pointed the finger on the Strait of Hormuz of one of the two decisive bottlenecks which we have in energy markets. And I cannot believe that his military would not have advised him that. So either there is a plan B of which we know very little, and of course day after day that hope disappears, or there is none, and then you're completely right. Now, this is a war which the smartest thing somebody saying about it I've heard so far was, if Iran wins, if it doesn't lose, the US loses if it doesn't win. And this idea that the Strait of Hormuz somehow is a European or Asian problem and the US could walk away from it is just nonsense, because the oil market and energy markets generally are global markets. The oil market is like a bathtub with many exit and entry points. And if you close one entry point, prices go up for everybody, as we see. They go up in the US just as much as anywhere else. So this idea of saying, oh, sorry, and walking away and saying this is not our problem will not work in reality. And I don't think it will come to that, because it will not work and everybody knows it.
Since you spoke about the spike, let me ask you, is this going to be a temporary phase, or is this going to result into a prolonged supply shock?
And as I said, we are still on the sort of the good side of the Rubicon. If hostilities would cease, the street would reopen. In the case of oil, we had multiple buffers. We had an excess supply of oil for the last few months before that war started. We had the strategic petroleum reserves, 90 days of import cover in the G7 countries, the European countries and the Asian countries, the IEA members. We had a lot of oil on the water from Iran and especially from Russia. We had an unknown of extent the surplus which was there in production be taken up by China, building up a vast strategic reserve. Nobody knows how big, but it's big. So we had all these buffers, which are now gradually being used up. In those buffers, should give us oil for the foreseeable future for at least 8-9 weeks at least, at a minimum, at the current rate of disruptions. But of course, everybody is nervous that the current rate of disruption is not sustained and that there will be more. And as I said earlier, if there is more, if it takes longer, or if there's some physical damage, then the picture will change. And that is what has markets on edge. In the case of natural gas, we have about 20% of global LNG, not of gas, but only of the shippable LNG part produced by Qatar. Qatar says the physical damage, which in the case of gas is already there, is 17% of its share of its production. And 17% of 20% equates to roughly about 4% of the global market, which also was in excess supply. So even in the case of natural gas, this is still a controllable disruption if it stops.
Now, Donald Trump on Truth Social said that Iran wants ceasefire, but we'll consider it only when the Strait of Hormuz is open and free. And then we all know the flip-flops when he said that the moment we exit, it will open automatically. The countries who depend on it heavily should now take efforts to open it. Donald Trump has also said that we will continue to bomb Iran and make them go back to the Stone Age. This stark contradiction when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, how is this going to play out in terms of global energy security and stability, of course?
There's many facets to this picture. Let me say, first of all, the last time I heard this bombing someone back into the Stone Age was in the context of the Vietnam War. And we all know how that ended for those people who uttered these kind of, to me, non-human, nonsensical statements, so I will not comment on that. Secondly, the war was started without much consultation of anybody, as far as we know, and it cannot be finished like that because there's too many interconnected pieces. For example, walking away now on part of the US leaves the Arab Gulf, the GCC countries, hanging. They have now a belligerent neighbor. They have a Strait of Hormuz for the export, which is closed and which then will be maintained and controlled by Iran, which is certainly not what they would aspire to. Even Iran itself is an unclear situation because there is one actor here who, quite figuratively, is the dog which hasn't barked yet, and that is the Iranian population. We don't know if the war stops tomorrow, how they will react. It is true that historically, it seems to be the case at least, this has never worked to bomb a country and then earn a democratic revolution in turn. I think that's something which in my country, Germany, was also tried in vain. And I don't think it will work now. But if the situation gets really to the point that infrastructure is attacked, that the lights go out, that you have this sheer scale of human misery there, and then the war stops, then we don't know what will happen. That is just another unknown. And so I think we should take all these factors into account, and then the reasonable expectation, unfortunately, is that this war will stretch out a little longer and that it probably will require a physical intervention in sending soldiers, at least to secure the Strait of Hormuz or secure the Iranian oil facilities, because all this loose talk of bombing the oil away or occupying Park, that will just end up in impoverishing a sizable country even more than it already has suffered.
Now, it's difficult to preempt what Donald Trump is going to say or do, given the flip-flops, and that continues now as well. I'm just going to quote him, and this is what he said. "We are going to hit each and every one of their electric generating plants very hard." Now, what does that mean for oil production? What does that mean for refining capacity and export logistics?
That's the part on which I can only give you an answer to the energy market, because colleagues of mine would make the point now that this amounts to a war crime, that you target willingly civilian infrastructure such as power plant or, God forbid, desalination plants. It would trigger a reaction on the part of Iran. For all we can see, Iran is still capable not only of shooting salvos into neighboring countries, but targeting quite precisely what they want to hit. And it would be presumably something illegal. Leaving that aside, the structure, the energy market structure you're asking for in Iran is quite straightforward. 90 to 95% of the power is generated by natural gas. So we have this big Pars field, which is shared with Qatar. The Qatari part is the part which gets exported and makes Qatar one of the biggest natural gas, or the biggest natural gas exporter on the planet. The Iranian part is used for domestic consumption, almost all of it, and that is heating and power production. So either disrupting the flows of gas or really picking power station after power station would make the lights go out, would make it very time-consuming and difficult to rectify or repair the situation, and would be a human disaster, would be a whole new dimension of this kind of war from the air.
Now, Donald Trump has said, and in a very non-serious way, that he will continue to bomb because it's fun. He often talks about taking control of Karg Island as well. If it were to happen, boots on ground invasion, although there's no confirmation on any of that. But do you think that would cripple Iran's energy production, or would that lead to even more, strong retaliation?
It's again speculation, but I have no sympathy whatsoever for the people ruling Iran for the last 40-something years. These are fanatics, these bad people, and this is all true. And so this is a real dilemma now, because if you would attempt to take Karg Island, for example, to control the oil revenues, I would not put it behind the current regime that they would just blow up their own oil infrastructure. They are with the back to the wall, and they know it. And so they have to maneuver, which is the only thing they know how to do, maneuver extremely carefully to get yourself out of this situation. But so has the U.S. It is really, a choice between two bad things. The U.S. can no longer just walk away, because that would leave West Iran, plus the Strait of Hormuz, plus the GCC countries, and to some extent the rest of the world, at the mercy of this regime, which has shown that it is abusing the power whenever it has an opportunity. And the U.S. cannot stay, because that would prolong the war. And if it's not done in a decisive enough manner, would multiply the misery in Iran and potentially in its neighborhood. So the only way, I think, it comes to the same conclusion, realistically looked at it and without emotions in the way, the only way to get out of it would really be, as Trump likes to call it, to finish the job. But the job, contrary to what he said yesterday night, is not finished right now. Right now, it just created a mess.
But, Donald Trump constantly says that they've been able to obliterate Iran. They have hit their missile production capabilities. Militarily, they have been able to hit Iran where it hurts the most. But despite that, there's no exit strategy at the moment. At least going by the statements being made by Donald Trump, we don't know what he's going to do next. Or there's a big question mark on whether he really knows what to do next or not. In this situation, if the war were to end today itself, do you think situation will go back to normal for the Strait of Hormuz and all those countries that are so heavily dependent on that?
Well, as I said earlier, it's contingent on how the exit looks like. If there's peace tomorrow, and by whatever it means, yes, energy markets have shown time and again that they're very flexible, that they can take a punch, and they can deal with disruptions faster than most people assume. So there's little doubt in my mind that markets would come back to normal. And you can see the reaction in the stock market and with the oil prices. That's the most reliable gauge we have of the sum of everything which is known about this war. You can see the reaction every time there's a hope for peace, the prices fall dramatically and stock markets go up again. But if the situation, say, escalates to an attempt to take Karg and it goes wrong and Karg is damaged and Iran still has the power to retaliate to its neighbors and attacks oil fields there, then all bets are off. And that is why we still see the present price movements. I think in the long term, as a result of this war, however it will end, diversity will be a very fashionable word in oil markets and energy markets globally. And we will see the current pipeline network to expand to make the producers less dependent on a bottleneck like the Strait of Hormuz. And also the other one, which we have in Asia, which will probably people having scratching their heads already how to avoid a repetition of this disaster. But the answer to your question, nobody can sit here and give it to you with a straight face, because as you said, nobody knows what, if anything, is the plan B, or if it's really true there is no plan B. So nobody knows how this war will end. And without that knowledge, we cannot declare the threat to energy markets from being over.
All right. I know that nobody can say anything with certainty, but if I were to put that question to you, What is a timeline in
Well,
your
as I said,
mind?
if you to put this question to me, there's peace tomorrow. I'm telling you, markets will normalize within a few months.
And normalization of the situation in terms of the Strait of Hormuz, do you think this will give significant advantage to Iran?
Well, if Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz, then the situation does not go back to the status quo ante, which was what I was referring to. Then you have this scenario of which the rest of the world, in particular the GCC countries, will be very, very worried that Iran then sort of comes out of this war not only as a winner because they didn't lose, but as a winner de facto because they gained another level of influence. And no doubt they would use it.
All right, Mr. Ruhl, thank you very much for taking those questions. Thank you for putting things into context. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure was all mine. Thank you.